Pulavanaka, everybody, a very warm welcome to our Talanoa on Pacific Futures Forces driving change in the Pacific to inform sustainable development strategy. We welcome let's have a look, 30 odd people joining us from across the region, perhaps even the globe. My name is Emily Sharp, and I'm honoured to be your moderator for this important discussion on using drivers of change and Pacific ways of knowing to develop strategy in the Pacific. I'm the Director of Strategy, Performance and Learning for the Pacific Community, privileged to work alongside our 22 Pacific Island countries and territories through science, innovation and knowledge for sustainable development. And then today, bringing their voices of experience and agency to the discussion, we have three fantastic panelists. Ms. Leituala, Kuiniselani, Toelupe, Tago, Elisara, the Regional Director for Polynesia and the Pacific Community. Ms. Sarah Mecartney, the Principal Strategy Advisor, also in the Pacific Community. And Dr. Maher from the Centre of Policy Future of University of Queensland. Today, we are inviting you to join us and journey into our futures work across the Pacific Island countries and territories. Our blue Pacific continent covers 30% of the Earth's surface. We have over 1,500 languages and we have diverse cultures. Our context is so diverse. Our largest population, around 8 million in PNG, and our smallest of 49 in Pitcairn, 1,500, Niue and Tokelau. The Pacific context is unique. We are an ocean of islands. Our connectedness is key to our resilience. And in the context of strategy development, we can't be having conversations in isolation. We also cannot have conversations about the future without looking to the past, the present context, and the forces shaping our future. Though the Pacific may share some drivers of change with other regions or the global megatrends, the Pacific is shaping up a very specific set of drivers of change for the region and for specific Pacific Island countries and territory contexts. Pacific leaders recognise that building a strong and resilient Pacific needs thought leadership, ownership. Our region is not a collection of fragmented small islands, but rather a united group of large ocean states. This is the Pacific, Blue Pacific narrative. And this narrative highlights the importance of the Pacific taking ownership of its future. This slide, this image just shows you the diversity of our large ocean states. And as a comparison, you will see the context of Europe and the size in relation to our large ocean states for anyone who might be joining us from outside the region. To make sense of the metaphor, our panelists will introduce themselves in the context of Pacific drivers of change and strategy development, the need for Pacific approaches, for collaboration, capacity strengthening, the need for divergence and divergence, and diversity of perspectives. Our panelists are deeply engaged in the development of the 2050 Blue Pacific Strategy, the 2030 Pacific Community Strategy, and the Pacific Regional Cultural Strategy. First up on our journey, I would like to invite Ms. Leituala to the mic to share with us her role and engagement and experience and wisdom in the future of the Pacific. Thank you, Leituala.
Let me just get organized. Okay. Yeah, tulona le paia maulunga le mamalu wa fia. Tulona le paia la silasi o to o le nei aso. Tulona paia sa wo o le nei tae au na liunga lua. Wa o to wa mai iai sui mai tu e fia o le kelope. Mālolo soifua ma le langi mama, whaafatai le alofa o le atua o le nei ua tini pā o le uto e pei o le whaivaivai. Thank you, Madam Moderator, for that introduction. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Let me begin by extending to you all warm Pacific greetings and a very good afternoon from Fiji. As Emily introduced, my name is Leituala, Kuiniselani, Toelupe, Tago, Elisara. I'm currently the Regional Director for Polynesia for SPC, or the Pacific Community. And it's always a pleasure to engage in spaces where we can share our Pacific perspectives and Pacific voices, contributing to the dialogue on advancing our collective sustainable development agenda. Our oral traditions passed down from generations to generations reflects the value and importance of language as a significant part of our heritage and our cultural identity as people of the Blue Pacific continent. The application of futures thinking from a Pacific perspective in the development of our Pacific Regional Cultural Strategy required that we engage our past underpinned by relationality and connectedness, which is at the heart of Pacific ways of knowing, Pacific ways of being, and Pacific ways of thinking in how we shape our future. The relationality of our existence as a people reinforces these connections across time and space between ourselves and our past, ourselves and our future, between ourselves as people, between ourselves and our environments, and indeed between ourselves and the ocean that sustains us. These dimensions of our existence as Pacific people speak to the importance of understanding context and connecting with ourselves and with our people at a deeper level in order to have a conversation about the futures and what that entails. So the use of metaphors and symbols, where therefore is an integral part of that futures conversation, because the use of metaphors and symbols help tell our story as navigators of the Blue Pacific Ocean. And when you're on that journey on that vast ocean, you need symbols and metaphors that speak to you, symbols and metaphors that you're familiar with that will guide you to your destination. For me, how I make sense of these connections is likened to what we refer to in Samoan as a tupua, or riddle, or a jigsaw puzzle that we seek to solve with each piece of the puzzle connected in a way that makes sense from all different perspectives, creating the picture and future of where we want to be. And so, what is the riddle that we seek an answer to? What is the puzzle that we seek to solve? And in this context, the riddle and the puzzle is the alternative futures that we seek. And to solve the riddle or puzzle, we need the pieces of the puzzle from our past connected to our futures to know exactly where we want to go and therefore our preferred future destination. We need the pieces of the puzzle connected or reconnected as part of our regional ecosystem to enable genuine engagement and more coordinated and connected approaches to how we deliver our strategies and our futures as a collective. In engaging our people in futures conversation that brings the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle of the past and the future together, we need to use metaphors and symbols embedded in our ways of knowing, thinking, and being to engage our people, to facilitate ownership of the journey ahead through genuine partnerships, thought leadership, and agency of our Pacific people. Our experience and practice on the developments of the Second Pacific Regional Culture Strategy, even our own SPC strategic plan, and engagement in the 2050 Blue Pacific Strategy is evidence of the importance of using metaphors as part of the futures literature, as it allows for deeper engagements and connection, because these metaphors speak to our values, they speak to our identity, and the underlying principles that dictate why we engage in the first place and how we engage and relate to each other as a collective. The use of metaphors to describe our values and principles of engagement and ways of working facilitated a deeper sense of engagement in our connection with our people as they became empowered through the use of language, content, and symbols that they can relate to. To conclude my short intervention, the application of futures thinking that builds on Pacific ways of knowing, being, and thinking has inspired our people to look to the future with confidence, building on our cultural assets and metaphors to design our journey moving forward with a renewed level of optimism, enabled by our connectedness and a deeper appreciation of our context. Our work as regional bodies and as development partners cannot afford to perpetuate divisions amongst parts of the jigsaw puzzle and amongst parts of our regional ecosystem. We have a duty and an obligation in developing these regional strategies to applying futures thinking and use language that resonates with our people, whether it's the use of metaphors or symbols and embedding our values as Pacific people, to revive what is truly our connectedness as a system and to enable a stronger, coordinated approach to delivering futures through our regional ecosystem as a platform to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, our future is indeed in our past, lest we forget, and I thank you, Madam Moderator.
Many thank you, Leituala, and for the additional metaphor from the Blue Pacific narrative and the large ocean nations to a jigsaw puzzle. And I feel like that metaphor really resonates with some of the past papers and panelists that have been before us in how we all as people can play a role as a piece of the jigsaw puzzle for sustainable development. We also would like, as this is a talanoa, everyone in the call to feel like they can be part of that jigsaw puzzle too. So if you have a question that you would like to pose to Leituala, please pop it in the chat, or we'll also open up the mic later on and you can pose that directly. So we will now hand to Sarah, passing the talanoa stick to another person in the jigsaw puzzle, very much connected to SPC strategic plan, to the 2050 strategy and to the regional cultural strategy. Sarah, can you share with us your role and contribution in shaping the future of the Pacific? Thank you.
Thank you, Emily, and greetings to everyone who's taking the time to join us today. It's really nice to see you all, and I'm glad to see there are already some questions coming in. It always keeps us on our toes. This is a learning journey for us always. As Emily mentioned, I am a strategy advisor here at the Pacific Community. I'm currently based in Noumea, so I'm one of the lucky few not currently in lockdown. And my feels for all of you who are, and I hope that you'll have a speedy recovery. If I, as a futurist, as someone trying to use to the best of my abilities strategic foresight, I did not see COVID-19 coming, but we were prepared. Our membership, we have 26 members in our organisation, had tasked us with the thought leadership to start to explore futures and the application of strategic foresight to create more robust strategy, to create strategies that were truly inclusive. So often you have people like me, and I'm sort of trying to hide the grey hairs in my head, that are planning the future for people who are not even at the table. Our members have asked us to take real consideration of making sure that there is a useful voice, there is innovation, there is creativity, and that there is courage in mapping out our preferred future. We're in a 5-phased approach, and I will speak to the development of our organisation's next 10-year strategic plan. And so we have a 5-phased approach to this. The first being really important to better understand where we are in our context, and where we want to go. This can all be done at your desk, and to be quite frank, it's the easiest way and less stressful way to write strategy, is to write what I know and what I think other people know or need. And instead, we've adopted an inclusive and participatory approach that takes a little bit more time, but then with the use of looking at the Pacific future, it tries to grab a more diverse voice, a voice that is not often heard. And I think I had a wise person from my country in Vanuatu asked me, who's not here and who are you not hearing? That's who you need to bring. And so to bring it back to what's driving change in the Pacific, we really stopped and invited our organization, which covers over 20 different sectors who are often too busy for planning and for strategy, but have such deep intelligence and insight, whether it's fishery science, climate change, human rights, advocating for those with disabilities. We brought them all together with the help of University of Queensland, which is why we're all here today, with Ray bringing us together. And we had a very quick activity that said, what is influencing us? What is having an impact on our future as an organization that is serving the Pacific? So we looked not just at ourselves, but we also looked out to the Pacific as a region as a whole. And if I can bring it back, not just to the jigsaw puzzle metaphor, but to the blue Pacific, it's one thing when we start a journey is to look at the skies and to see the clouds and to have a good idea of where the birds are showing us to go. It's been really important to look at the waves and where they're coming from, and also to the winds and where they are driving us to. And we can't do that on our own. We really need to invite everyone's voice and experience and to share the markers as we journey towards the future we want. So we can see the reef, we can see the whales, we can see the birds. And so undertaking a specific focus on drivers of change in our region, we were able to really get to the heart of what was important to people. So it's not us deciding for others, but it is us listening to others and what their fears are, what their hopes are, and together looking at what opportunities they are for creating a future for the next generation to prosper and for their well-being. But I'll leave that for Ray to speak to. But I think what was really exciting for us is not only to get lots of different influences, but then it comes to the question, so what? What are you going to do with that knowledge? Are they connected? What does it mean? And what are you exactly going to do about it yourself? And so in conventional strategizing, I suppose, anchors it ourselves in what we know, what we're certain about, what we've projected, what we've forecasted, what we've modeled. But the approach we've taken is to look at what we don't know, what we're uncertain about, and what influence that has on us and what we can do to help shape a potential outcome. For example, we didn't know COVID was going to have such a huge impact. It is now on our radar. It hasn't stopped us at all. It's just made us more capable of navigating the additional reefs and barriers, and that works its way into the strategy by ensuring that we have multiple approaches rather than putting all our eggs in one basket. I was saying to my colleagues earlier, if we hadn't had COVID, what would that look like? And I'd said, as an OCD person, it would be like trying to complete a jigsaw puzzle and one of my older brothers stealing 6 of the pieces of the puzzle because they know how much it frustrated me. So we'd have a great strategy, but we would not have the ownership. And I think, just to conclude, our strategy is is guided by principles given to us by our members, which is basically about being inclusive, about the process, building ownership, so that we know that all the time and investment that is put into strategy, that people can feel that they contributed, that it is meaningful to them, and that it can be implemented. And so with that, I'll stop. Otherwise, I get too excited about strategy. Back to the moderator. Thank you, Emily.
Thanks, Sarah. And you've really been leading quite a lot of processes based around practical application as well. And as you'd mentioned, working across so many sectors. And it was great to be able to be part of your journey of working with scientists at heads of fisheries and applying a futures triangle methodology with very Pacific approaches. And as you said, you had, you really wove in the concept of the tides, of the celestial navigation, of both the weights of the past and the opportunities. And I think that having, that amount of engagement, I think Leituala, you said it does take time, takes longer as well, Sarah, but being able to see how the connections are in real time across multiple strategies and decision-making processes and using Pacific futures approaches is really exciting. Sarah, as you said, we've had Ray along the journey accompanying us, SPC that is. Ray came at a time of great uncertainty, and I'm sure he'll speak to that. But it has been a real asset actually to have someone outside of the organisation bringing a certain set of skills and expertise and a way of being able to ask questions that perhaps you can't ask when you're inside of the organisation. So Ray, I'll hand the Talanoa stick to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily, and Sarah and Leituala as well, of course. Yeah, I'm Ray Maher. I'm a researcher at the Centre for Policy Futures at the University of Queensland, and most of my work focuses on the various forms of sustainable development strategy. And it's certainly been a great privilege working with my colleagues here from SPC, primarily to support the development of their organisational strategy, and of course a number of other sort of journeys and side paths along the way. I think from the beginning of our collaboration, it's really struck me that SPC is acutely aware of these tides of change that are really pushing the future of the Pacific in different directions. The forces of climate change, of migration, food systems, health, for example, they all influence how the coming decades will unfold in the Pacific. And of course, they all compete for our attention when making strategic decisions. And that could be an organizational strategy, or that could also be any form of development strategy. Many of these themes hold true. So what SPC could have done is they could have reduced this complexity by just focusing on one main issue and excluding the rest. They could have assumed that the future is just an extension of the present. But instead, SPC and its membership, as we've heard, really saw disruptions as an opportunity to shape the organization's future. So that's where Emily and Sarah originally reached out to me to work with them and really help find some clarity amongst all of this complexity. And of course, I had my bags literally packed and ready to travel to Suva and Noumea and join them in person. And of course, the last minute travel restrictions came into play. So we had to shift all of that work and those activities into an online environment, which really had some challenges, but also some pretty significant silver linings, which I think will continue to play out. So I'll just share a screen momentarily. So a few sort of key themes in the strategic planning. So firstly, to build up sort of a comprehensive picture of these emerging issues, it was really essential to learn from people with different perspectives. So through a series of collaborative workshops, we engaged with 152 staff from SPC, representing all divisions at different career levels and gender balanced. And we also engaged with 7 academics from across the University of Queensland who were each experienced in working with and for the Pacific. And these diverse groups scanned the horizon across these different categories to identify over 600 unique forces that are driving change in the Pacific. And that really provided some very important context on which to build our shared understanding and a foundation for building strategy. You know, these are some of the themes which are shaping the future. It was also important to unpack how SPC relates to its broader environment. You know, it's easy to stay within the worldview or the framing of your particular discipline or of your job or your immediate responsibilities. But when it comes to strategy, it's critical we understand how that's all connected. So rather than isolated elements, we used a systems approach to communicate how SPC's members, governance, capabilities, and organizational culture, for example, all contributed to that much bigger SPC system. So we developed this map, which really provided a visual tool to support very rich conversations among SPC staff. And it helped participants to really see their place in the system and how all their work is connected. It kind of provided the higher common perspective from which people could make strategic decisions and see the place of connection. But we then asked how this system might change in the future. And in doing so, it was really important to represent SPC's future not as inevitable, but as a choice among alternatives. So teams reflected on the SPC system through 3 different scenarios, and each scenario represented different potential futures or choices which SPC could make as to how it changes over the coming decades. It could follow the path of business as usual, it could change incrementally, or it could transform. And this approach really built the agency of participants, and it supported them to be much more ambitious in their visions of the future. It's also a valuable way of navigating sort of the political challenges within any organization of suggesting some kind of change. You know, change can be difficult, but when it's merely a scenario, it's quite possible to really reach out and see what those, for example, what transformation might look like, and then learn from that to develop strategy. I think another thing that resonated throughout this strategic planning process is that my colleagues here really impressed upon me was the importance of reciprocity, and of giving back to the participants who are so generous with their time and knowledge. So we really designed the activities to support sharing knowledge of each other's expertise and also of developing skills in foresight. And it's been great to see that develop and go forward as many of the participants have gone on to apply foresight methods in a whole range of planning and strategy activities, and that capacity continues to grow and develop through application, through learning from others, and on it goes. So I think there's a definite strength, and that itself is going to be its own brilliant journey into the future. So despite the challenges of collaborating across barriers in an online environment, this collective knowledge sharing through these systems approaches and foresight activities has proved to be really valuable. So it's, firstly, it's informed SPC's strategic plan, it's informed business plans within specific divisions, and it's contributed to the 2050 Blue Pacific Regional Strategy. And along that way, we've developed frameworks and guided processes into a toolkit called Pathfinder Pacific. I'm speaking about this tomorrow in a session if you want to hear more about it, but it will be continued to be developed with members' input, and I really hope it will continue to support foresight and knowledge sharing for a thriving Pacific as SPC takes it forward. Thank you for now. Back to you, Emily.
Thanks, Ray. Yeah, your comments there around reciprocity and around building futures literacy and capability really resonated, and definitely that was Sarah and I were very privileged to have worked with Dr. Colin Tuitonga, our previous Director General, who gave us one instruction really around developing strategy, and that was about ownership, and ownership coming from agency and the agency of all people. And I think that's been a very common thread being woven across our panelists, that to have agency, you need to feel like you can see yourself in the process, very much have a role to play and a contribution to make, and that the process has meaning for you, and that as you commit your time, you also leave with something as well as giving something. And you're absolutely correct. Our staff and our members who've been on a journey of developing futures literacy and foresight have in real time been applying those new skills to different strategy developments and conversations. So you definitely have been a gift giving, and that gift is still being received and given. I think it's probably really a real-time action learning process,
Very much.
not just a strategic development process. Please don't forget to put any questions you have in the chat. I know that we do have one already. So what we'll do, I just have a couple of questions to put to our panelists, and then we will invite people to put their microphones on. So just one question to each panelist to dig a little bit deeper into your into the wisdom. Leituala, you were really very strong on relationships and relationality, connectedness in your intervention, connected to specific ways of knowing, connected to culture, but connected to that, I think you used the word, the ecosystem across the Pacific. Could you just talk to us a little bit more about the relationships, and how does understanding drivers of change help the connections? Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Maybe I would begin by talking about one of the key challenges that we continue to face, and that is there is so many strategies and frameworks that are in place, and while it's great to see the strategic thinking and foresight of our people in developing these different instruments, what makes it challenging is we only begin the process of connecting and making those connections after the fact and after they developed. And as we all know, this is what makes coordination and making connections across these multiple instruments a challenge. And so in applying this learning on board, the work that we've done where we've led and engaged in the development of these different strategies is we've taken a more connected and more coordinated approach, utilizing the intelligence from the drivers of change to make those connections and realize the synergies across these three strategies. Now, the relationship across these instruments is very clear. We serve the same region, we all serve the same people, and we are part of the same regional ecosystem, but servicing different parts of our system depending on our mandates and our capabilities. And because of the nature of our ecosystem and our existence, the drivers of change is what we share as a collective in our ecosystem. And these are what dictates how we shape our futures and how we have the conversations about who does what in the context of our different strategies and different frameworks as a collective. Does that, I'm not sure that kind of...
Yes, no, that was very powerful. Thank you. And I think, Sarah, I might just see if I can continue that thought thread from Leituala on. I know you have done a lot of stepping back and looking at the ecosystem from that bird's eye view and really thinking about where the connections of regional frameworks are, where the connections are from actual actors in the ecosystem. As many in the call will know, we have very thin bandwidth public services, and often people wear multiple hats, so we'll have the same people involved in many strategies. You also spoke about empowerment and ownership. So could you maybe weave some of those threads in for us, maybe even giving a couple of practical examples of how you've looked at that ecosystem, the frameworks, the people, to really bring that connectedness in that Leituala just referred to? Thanks.
Thanks. Where to begin? To use the jigsaw puzzle metaphor, you know, I love doing 8,000 pieces plus. It's very therapeutic. And then I started to look at the Pacific regional ecosystem of policy instruments and strategies, and thought, maybe I should get down to a 1,000 piece jigsaw puzzle. It's less stressful. But it was really important to understand the context, where these instruments, where these guides, where these tools have come from, and what purpose they were intended for, and why and how to better optimize them. From a selfish point of view, SPC as an organization has responsibilities signed by Pacific leaders to deliver on these aspirations and goals for their peoples. So you can't just go like, let's start again, clean slate. You really have to stop, assess what is their purpose, what are the resources required, what are the capabilities and skills needed, and are they connected? It seems for a while at times when I'm working one of those jigsaw puzzles where you don't have the picture to follow, and I've been a visual person, it's a little bit working in the dark. And so starting to look for how these connected. And I think for me, there's a lot of opportunities where you can see overlaps that SPC through its own strategic process can build on. But at the same time, it got me to thinking, what are the commonalities aside from wanting to serve the Blue Pacific? And what's increasingly of interest, deeper interest for me, the values of ownership, the values of agency, the values of participatory engagement. And as Leituala said earlier, you know, it's always terrible when you're a second thought to be invited to the party. If you're like me, I'm not coming, I'm busy. Same thing applies for strategy. Ask at the beginning, because this is where you get the great ideas. And I think there is a shift in the way that we're designing programs, the way we're designing policy discussions, and the way that we're designing strategies. And I really think that before you begin, talk to your peers, talk to your families. I mean, if you ever want an honest opinion, ask a brother, ask a sister, don't ask your aunties. I said all the Pacific Islanders in the room, you know, the aunties will give you all of the things that you have missed. So that it's just really important to try and get people to the table. You offer the invitation and you invite people to connect and to help guide you on the right path and to complete that puzzle. Thank you, Emily.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, that importance of humility and asking first and building on strength and asset. And as you said, Ray, earlier, you know, we could have just looked to the global mega trends, but instead we took the time to engage and get Pacific perspectives. Can you give us a little bit of a reflection on, I guess, what that looks like as being different, you know, because we know that funders, there's often a driver of change politically to get something done quickly. However, there's a trade-off that I'm hearing in your reflection. So perhaps if you could just talk to us a bit more about that.
Yeah, certainly, Emily. And it's funny, I was just started doing a quick Google as quickly as I could to get an image of Singapore in the year 2100 and of flying cars and all the rest of it. There's a lot of work being done in foresight over at least 40 years of looking at different drivers of change and looking at mega trends. And most of that work is conducted in very highly developed, very, very high population density places. So of course, you know, those, like us all, the people who are doing that work have a particular perspective and worldviews. They have particular issues they're dealing with. So the types of trends that emerge as sort of the big issues of the day are are embedded in that context. But because those voices are very powerful and strong, and they have big global reach, what that turns into is we see these sets, for example, of sort of the global mega trends. And that's about electric vehicles and flying cars and different sorts of, mega scale infrastructure, or up to the, the borderline sci-fi stuff about uploading your consciousness to the matrix, anywhere along that spectrum. And all of that, it's hard to see it at the time, but all of that has emerged from a particular set of worldviews, and it's relevant to a particular place. So we shouldn't be surprised, but perhaps we might be, when we do that sort of work in the Pacific, and we ask people who have lived and worked in the Pacific, maybe for many generations or even for a career, and to see the types of things that emerge, it's very, very different. So what does that mean? I think one thing that I take from that, what does that mean, for example, when policymakers and funding agencies in, say, Australia start to make decisions about how they're going to engage in or with the Pacific, about geopolitical issues, etc. And if they're building those decisions on the sort of understanding of the mega trends that have come from somewhere else, the way they're going to engage, the types of decisions they'll make, the things they'll prioritize are going to be totally different. So I think there's just been phenomenal value in getting this sort of synthesized knowledge from across SPC and across very different disciplines. It's totally unique, and there isn't a sort of consultant in the world that has got a better understanding of these driving forces in the Pacific than the combined knowledge of all these people who have been involved. I think we need to spread it far and wide so that others making decisions, perhaps on behalf of the Pacific, can take that perspective on board in a really genuine way.
Thank you, Ray. Very powerful, and I think some similar messages to the panel that was just before us around disruption to aid. Now, I know that we have a couple of questions in the chat, and in particular, I was wondering if Apolosi wouldn't mind unmuting and posing your question. You've got two, actually. One, Leituala may have covered in terms of the lessons learned, but also you have a really great one there about the future in our past.
Hola everyone, I am Apolosi. Sorry, you can see me now. I'm here at the moment in Sydney. I've just completed my UC semester program. My question is just because I've written this question 3 days ago. I'm trying to remember why I wrote that question. Probably I can go to the second question that I raised first. Just this morning after Leituala spoke, is what does it mean our future is in the past? I know you spoke on the symbols and metaphors. Even though I'm from the Pacific, sometimes I'm still not able to understand some of the metaphors or the symbols that have been used. What do you mean our future is in the past, and how is this related to the forces and the changes that we are trying to drive today? While you're answering, I'll try to bring my mind back to the first question that I raised 3 days ago. Thanks.
Thank you, Apolosi. Our future is in our past is a common metaphorical reference to time and space. And this cultural lens views the past clearly in front of us, while the future remains uncertain. It reminds us that our future is grounded in our past and dependent on the choices we make and the actions that we take in the present. We recognize that the many challenges we face as a region are also opportunities that we need to work towards in designing and in framing what will be the alternative futures or our preferred future in that sense.
Thanks. I think it's just something that just came to mind when you said that. I thought probably it's related to what I will usually understand back in my context in Fiji is when I go to the village, my grandmother usually said that this is how we usually do in the past. And in that sense, she's trying to say that this is how we should do it today and in the future. And I'm trying to, okay, probably you are probably out of context now because of the changes of time. And I thought of whether that's related to my experience or of the metaphor they use mostly in the village by our uncles and grannies. And I think probably you've answered that question. And I think it's also related to my first question that I raised a while ago, 3 days ago, is how do we, what lessons that can we learn from the past? And I think that's probably answered by Ray in sort of what are we doing now, SPC, and what the lessons that we learn in terms of lows and the highs, and what we can take to the future so that we can improve and sustain our future. And probably that's my metaphor that I'm also always referring to my grandmother when she said, this is how we do it, and it can help you today. And I think that's probably related to what I have the first question that I raised earlier. Thanks.
Thank you. It's a great question. And I have to say it's one that we get asked in a kind of different ways when we're doing a futures triangle exercise as well. And we look at the pushes, the pulls, and the weights of the past. And often we have people who say, hang on, why is the past a weight? Why do we want to feel like everything from the past we have to leave behind when many of the things from the past are our greatest strengths? And I've only really heard that kind of feedback from Pacific Island participants in futures exercises. I'm not sure, Ray, if you have shared that or others in the call.
I might just make one comment, and I think that there's easy to make a misunderstanding here. I don't think anyone here in this conversation is having that misunderstanding, but it's not the same to say that the future will be the same as the past. It's that when we're shaping, the future will always be unique, and no 2 points in history have ever been the same. But there are similar forces, there are similar values, which Leituala mentioned also, which can be these common threads that you can continue to draw on and get strength from. So I think it can be important just to investigate that. Certainly the past has a very powerful effect on the future and has many strengths that we can draw from. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that we need to be anchored in it when it's against, when times change or should change in other ways.
So here's the opportunity now to really talanoa with us. Thank you for your first question. If we have any others in the call who would just like to unmute themselves, be brave, be part of the conversation, that would be really great. We've got 10 minutes left to be able to continue on with and also to learn from people as participants.
Yes, can I say something? Yeah. Yeah, it's great. I'm from West Papua, Indonesia. I've learned a lot from this conversation today, but the thing is, when we think about sustainable development, we think about three main aspects. Should be balanced between environment, social, economic, and social field culture. So, like Leituala, really, I agree with you that not all the approach should be apply in one method or one approach. For instance, like in West Papua, they develop like oil palm everywhere. Even they didn't think about people who are living in the highlands or in the hills, or even in the islands as well. So I mean, like the central government, they have to think about the culture, the values of the local people, indigenous people. They don't like do deforestation, cutting down all the primary forests, and then a change into the oil palm plantation or cocoa plantations, because they only think about the economic things, but they forgot about environment and also the local people who are living and living on the forest. So that's why, like myself, I really focus on risk or challenge. So I'm my expertise in agribusiness. So now I'm doing PhD that I'm going to do like sustainable agribusiness supply chain risk management. I'm going to do that research just to help the government to making policies just to keep balance between this kind of things. So I think learning from the past to manage that kind of challenge today's and then in the future. So that's great. Thank you very much.
Yes, very powerful, having to balance all of those drivers of change. And Sarah, Ray, maybe you want to just elaborate a little bit on the method that we use to ensure that we really got a breadth, a depth across the different drivers of change, just from a little practical example.
Yeah, I will. I'll keep it brief so we can keep other conversations going, but I might just quickly share my screen again to talk about it. So I think there was a whole lot of different strategies that we employed simultaneously to help generate that breadth of knowledge, because we knew just how important it was. So one way, the first way was to have just diverse perspectives in the room, to have people from very different backgrounds, different divisions across SPC, etc. And different, as I said, gender diverse, people from different career levels as well. So that firstly, that you've got to have the foundation there to draw that knowledge from. We used a framework based on the Stir Deeper framework, slightly revised, to ask people about some of the forces driving change under these different categories that you can see right here. And again, many of those categories people did not have particular expertise in. So, some of them, of course, there were experts in every one of these in the room somewhere, but not everyone was an expert in demographics or technology or whatever. But nonetheless, by asking people to just think about, from their general knowledge of living and working in the Pacific, what are some of the drivers of change in these different categories, really helps to broaden the reach of those different driving forces that we can identify. And then beyond that, we did a series of activities to sort of synthesize them and bring them together. Even every group had people from very different backgrounds as well. And I mean, there was a whole lot of other processes we can talk about. Similarly, with the systems component of it, that was really showing that all of these parts are relevant. So wherever you sit, don't keep your thinking to that space. Reach out much more broadly to how SPC really interacts with the region and beyond. And I think I'll say that all those sorts of activities tailored to different contexts can be very relevant. So whether it's navigating logging, or where these oil platforms are being distributed around, all of those sorts of things, they can be useful foundations for drawing knowledge, getting different perspectives on those issues, and then proactively looking at what that future might look like. What are the choices and how that future might unfold?
And that's a great segue, Ray. We've got a question in the chat from Rosanna. Rosanna, would you like to put your camera and unmute yourself to pose your question, because it's about diversity in voice, so a great follow-up question. I'm not sure, Rosanna, if you'd like to pose your question to the panel.
Emily, Rosanna might have just left the meeting, the
Okay.
section.
Looks like we have
So the
Keithan is
question-
unmuted as well. If that's sorry, Emily.
Great. No, that's good. Go.
Just interested to know like one particular thing. So probably I'll start here. Actually, I was listening to a couple of presentations. And it was very good, like in terms of how you can consider different cultural values, practices, norms, and then, factor that into the development of policies, strategies to chart a way forward for the Pacific Island nations. And I particularly interested to know because most of the cultural norms and practices usually come in between when it comes to implementing the policies and even the short-term and long-term strategies as well for Papua New Guinea. So how can you guys help to rectify those bad cultural practices that sort of becoming an obstacle to the progress or even to the implementation of the policies, because it keeps the policy back. And we also don't want to remove those cultural practices which are seen to be not good enough, because it's part of the culture and it's part of our life. So we always wanted to, stick to that and keep on going. So when it comes to moving forward, how can those cultural values and practices that you think are not good for nation building, or probably we think becomes an obstacle to the progress of a nation, be probably do our will or something like that? Is it the best way to do that, or I'm just trying to know?
Sarah, would you like to take this one?
Great, hard question. 30 seconds left. Really, you can put your questions also in the chat group under the session, and we can try and get back to you. But it really is about shifting a mindset, which unfortunately does not take 30 seconds, but it's a good place to start. And I think it comes from within the country, within the whatever, if it's an organizational culture, within a community culture, within a policy culture. It takes that courage and that creativity that futures thinking can help bring to that, and it takes your champions. I'm happy to take more questions, bearing in mind the time. I'm starting to speak really fast. Lucky it's not been interpreted, and I can put my email address also in the chat. We can catch up later. But great question, and it's exciting to hear that there's more and more people thinking about what works, not what we used to do, but what is going to work for us now and for our next generations. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Ray, just a time check. I think we're at our panel time. Yes. But yes, as Sarah said, please feel free to reach out and pose any additional questions to any of us. This is ongoing. We are still very much writing our future with our members and with our stakeholders for the SPC strategic plan, and very much working alongside our colleagues at the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat for the 2050 Blue Pacific strategy, and of course Leituala leading on the regional cultural strategy. So yes, very much we'd be very keen to hear any learning that you would be willing to share with us, any wisdom and insight, and also any that we might be able to share with you. Thanks so much for your time. Thank you for our panelists. Always great to come together in Talanoa, although we do like to usually spend quite a few hours. So we've done it in a very rapid session today. And we wish you all the very best for the rest of the this important conference.
And I would just like to remind all the delegates who want to reach out to the panelists that you can do so, because they are also attendees in the conference. So reach out, view their profile, send a message, say hi, arrange a meetup if they have time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Toa. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you for the organisers and the Zoom managers.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
Bon
Yeah,
app.
bye.